You're trying to talk to her about something that's been bothering you. Nothing aggressive, nothing loud. You've waited for the right moment. You've chosen your words carefully. And then, halfway through your second sentence, she clutches at her head. I can't do this right now. I have a migraine. Or she's too exhausted. Or her wrist hurts. Or suddenly she feels faint. And then you're not having the conversation anymore. You're managing her distress, apologizing for bringing it up, making sure she's okay. The issue you raised is gone, forgotten, and you're left wondering if you're cruel for even raising it. Here's the thing, you can't know if her symptoms were real. You genuinely can't. Migraines are real, exhaustion is real, physical pain is real. And questioning whether someone is truly unwell feels like calling them a liar. It feels dishonorable, sometimes even unkind. So you back down. You tell yourself her health comes first. You carry the responsibility she couldn't handle. You stay quiet. Then, an hour later, you see her on the couch, laughing at something on her phone, or chatting with a friend like nothing happened, or planning tomorrow's activities with energy you haven't seen all week. And you feel confused, maybe even a little crazy, because the migraine that was too severe to talk seemed to vanish the moment you stopped talking. But you push the thought away because noticing that feels wrong, unkind, like you're the problem for even thinking it. This is feigned injury or illness, the deliberate claim of symptoms, fabricated, exaggerated, or selectively deployed at precisely the moment you need accountability, a conversation, or even shared effort from your abuser. These symptoms are designed to shut you down, transfer responsibility of the task back onto you, and make your needs disappear. What makes this particular tactic so confusing is that you can't definitively prove the symptoms are not real. You are not a doctor. You can't see inside someone's experience of pain or exhaustion. All you have is the timing, and that timing tells you a story. She's always too unwell when it's your turn to speak, your turn to rest, your turn to need something. You may not be able to prove that it's fake, but the pattern proves it's a manipulation tactic. In today's episode, we'll break down what feigned injury or illness is, why it is so difficult to identify, especially for men, and the three distinct ways this tactic shows up within an abusive dynamic. We'll also cover practical tools you can use to recognize the pattern and protect yourself when you're still living within this dynamic. For those of you who are new here, this is Stand Again, a lived experience platform for male victims of family violence. Abuse is not limited to one gender, but this channel focuses on the male perspective because it is so often dismissed or misunderstood. If this content helps you, please like, subscribe, and add the words Stand Again into the comments. Those two words might help another man find his. Let's start with the definition. Feigned injury or illness is a manipulation tactic where physical or emotional symptoms are used to avoid accountability, shut down difficult conversations, or transfer responsibilities onto you. The symptoms themselves can be fabricated or just exaggerated, or even in some instances genuine. What defines this as a tactic isn't the authenticity of the symptoms, but how they're deployed and when they appear. This tactic typically emerges when the abuser feels challenged or exposed. You try to set a boundary, perhaps raise a concern about her behavior, or ask for shared effort in the relationship. Just as you're about to speak your truth or hold her accountable, she suddenly becomes unwell. A migraine appears or exhaustion sets in. She feels faint or anxious or just too fragile to continue the conversation. The message underneath is clear. Your voice is too much. Your needs are dangerous to her. Speaking up causes her harm. What happens next is the mechanism that makes this tactic so effective. The conversation shifts immediately. You go from expressing your own pain or needs to managing hers. Your concern for her well being kicks in. Your anger or frustration softens, and you start to question whether speaking up at all makes you cruel or inconsiderate. The issue you raised, the boundary you were trying to set, or the accountability you were seeking, disappears under the weight of her distress. Research on manipulation in close relationships identifies this as a regression tactic, the use of helplessness, emotional collapse, and perceived fragility to influence behavior. It works because it arouses sympathy and guilt, fundamentally shifting who carries the emotional burden within that interaction. This creates a fundamental shift in the emotional dynamic. You're no longer two people navigating a difficult conversation. You're now the caretaker managing a crisis. Your needs become secondary. Her symptoms now become primary. And the original issue is forgotten, postponed, or abandoned entirely. This particular form of manipulation is especially effective at stopping behaviors, getting you to back down, cease confrontation, and abandon your position. That's its function. That's why it's deployed. Here is what makes this tactic so psychologically complex. It's because you genuinely cannot know whether the symptoms are real or not. Pain is subjective, exhaustion is invisible, anxiety and emotional overwhelm exists beyond external verification. There's no test you can run, no objective measure you can apply. You're left in a position where you must either take her at her word or risk being the person who dismisses genuine suffering. Adding to this complexity is research showing that people who repeatedly perform symptoms can actually come to believe them. What may have started as strategic deployment can, through repetition and self justification, become genuinely experienced distress. The line between performing illness and experiencing it becomes blurred. This does not mean you're wrong about the pattern or the timing. It means the distress you're witnessing might actually become psychosomatically authentic, even if it originally originated as manipulation. She may genuinely feel a migraine now, even though it conveniently appears every time you try to speak. The symptoms become real to her, which makes them even harder for you to challenge. That uncertainty creates paralysis because the social and moral cost of getting this wrong is enormous. If you doubt her and she's genuinely unwell, you're suddenly heartless. If you challenge her symptoms and she's truly in pain, you're cruel. The potential for being wrong in that direction feels so much worse than the cost of being manipulated. So you err on the side of compassion. You back down. You carry more. You stay quiet about your needs. This is exactly why abusers choose this particular tactic. It's low risk for them and high cost for you. If you accept the symptoms at face value, they avoid accountability and you absorb all the responsibility. If you challenge the symptoms, you become the aggressor, the person who doesn't care, who's too demanding, who expects too much from someone who's suffering. Either way, they win. The tactic does not require proof, it only requires your compassion and your uncertainty on if it is real. For men, this tactic exploits specific psychological vulnerabilities. We're conditioned to be problem solvers, but symptoms like migraine, exhaustion, and anxiety can't be fixed, they can only be managed. This leaves you in a position where the only solution is to absorb more responsibility to compensate for what she cannot handle. Men are also taught to be logical and reasonable, and that reasonable response when someone is unwell is to give them space, prioritize their recovery, and postpone difficult conversations. Your own rationality becomes the mechanism that keeps you silent. There's also the caretaker dimension that's particularly powerful for men. If someone you love is suffering and you don't help, what kind of man are you? That guilt is immediate and crushing. It overrides the pattern recognition of seeing this as feigned and fake illnesses and weakness. It makes you willing to carry far more than your share rather than risk being the kind of person who turns their back on someone in need. And because men are often socialized to push through their own pain, to work when we are sick, to function when we are exhausted, there's an internal comparison happening. Maybe I'm just tougher. Maybe she genuinely can't handle what I can. That self doubt keeps you from trusting your own observations. The abuser understands all of this. Whether consciously or through learned behavior, she knows that claiming illness or distress will trigger your caretaking instinct. She knows you won't accuse her of lying because that violates your sense of fairness and decency. She knows that even if you start to notice a pattern, that her symptoms always appear when your needs surface, you'll doubt yourself before you doubt her. Because doubting her means accepting that someone you love is manipulating you. And that realization is so painful that most men will avoid it for as long as possible. But here's what eventually breaks through that confusion, it's the evidence. You start noticing that her symptoms are selective. She's too exhausted to help with the dishes, but an hour later she's energized and laughing on the phone with her friends. The wrist that was too painful to lift the laundry basket somehow manages to carry shopping bags the next day. The migraine that was too severe to discuss your concerns disappears when she wants to make plans for the weekend. The anxiety that makes her too fragile to hear feedback about her behavior never seems to interfere with her ability to criticize yours. The symptoms don't follow the pattern of genuine illness, they follow the pattern of your needs. You see her function perfectly well in every context except the one where you require something from her. She can manage stress at work, she can engage socially, she can handle conflict with others. But the moment you need shared effort, accountability, or space to speak, she becomes incapable. The exhaustion is always too severe when it's your turn to rest. The pain is always too intense when it's time for her to contribute. And the emotional fragility only appears when you're trying to set a boundary. This is not illness adapting to her capacity. This is capacity adapting to what she wants to avoid. And then there's the hypocrisy. When you have a migraine, she does not stop. She keeps demanding answers, pushing conversations, expecting you to function. When you're exhausted, you're told to push through. There's no consideration for your state, no pause in her expectations. When you're emotionally overwhelmed, she doesn't soften or give you space. She insults you for being weak, mocks you for not being able to handle pressure, or accuses you of being dramatic. The compassion and accommodation she demands for herself is never extended to you. Her symptoms require immediate attention and complete cessation of your needs. Your symptoms are character flaws that prove you're inadequate. That double standard is the clearest evidence that this isn't about genuine illness, it's about control. That's when you realize the symptoms are not the problem, the timing is a tactic. She's not sick, she's strategic. And the pattern you've been seeing is not you being unfair or keeping score. It's you finally recognizing what's been happening all along. The distress might feel real to her, the symptoms might be genuinely experienced, but their deployment is deliberate, and that distinction matters. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The question is no longer whether she's unwell, the question is whether you're willing to keep pretending the pattern doesn't exist. This tactic shows up in three distinct ways. Each operates differently, targets different vulnerabilities, and appears at different moments within the abusive dynamic. Understanding these patterns help you recognize what you're dealing with and why it's been so hard to name. The first type is emotional collapse as deflection. Emotional collapse as deflection is a sudden psychological breakdown that arrives the moment you try to hold her accountable. You've prepared yourself, you've chosen your words carefully, you're calm, measured, and clear about what you need to address. And before you can finish your sentences, she breaks down. Tears, silence, Shaking, she sits on the floor, staring at nothing, saying she can't cope with this, that she's too traumatized, that she's not strong enough to have this conversation. What just happened is a complete reversal of roles. You came into this conversation with a legitimate concern, something she did that hurt you, a boundary you need to set, a pattern you need to address. But within seconds, you're no longer the person with the concern. You're the person managing her crisis. Your job shifts from expressing pain to preventing her pain. So you drop the boundary. You reassure her that she's not a bad person, that she's safe, that everything is okay. The original issue, the reason you tried to speak in the first place, disappears completely. This is a regression tactic. It works by positioning the abuser as helpless, overwhelmed, and incapable of handling the pressure. The collapse arouses your sympathy and guilt, redirecting all emotional energy towards stabilizing her rather than addressing what you raised. The message becomes clear. Your voice is dangerous to her. Your needs cause her harm. Speaking up breaks her. What makes this pattern so identifiable is its precision. The collapse does not happen during everyday stress. It does not happen when the kids are screaming, when real pressure hits, or when life gets genuinely overwhelming. It happens when you get close to holding her accountable. It's triggered by your boundary, not by her capacity. And the moment you back down, she's fine again. The fragility vanishes. The crisis resolves itself the instant you stop pushing. The psychological impact on you is profound. You start to believe your feelings are harmful, that raising concerns makes you cruel, that being heard requires breaking somebody you love. So you stop trying. You internalize the idea that her emotional state is more important than your truth, not because you're weak, but because this dynamic has been engineered to make you the regulator of her distress while your own pain goes unaddressed. Type 2 is physical frailty as leverage. Physical frailty as leverage is the strategic use of physical symptoms like fatigue or pain, injury, or illness to avoid responsibility and enforce a one sided effort. What makes this tactic distinct from emotional collapse is its persistence. This is not a sudden breakdown in a single conversation. This is an ongoing claim of physical limitation that consistently appears only when shared effort is required. She's too tired to help with household tasks, but never too tired to scroll through social media for hours. Her wrist hurts too much to lift a laundry basket, but she can carry shopping bags with no issue. The migraine is too severe to discuss your concerns, but it does not prevent her from making plans with friends. The back pain makes it impossible for her to contribute to cleaning, but she's fine to be outside playing with the kids. This creates a profound imbalance in the relationship. You're expected to absorb more and more responsibility to compensate for her physical limitations. You take on the tasks she can't manage, you carry the weight she claims she cannot. And because questioning someone's physical pain feels cruel, you do it without complaint. You tell yourself that this is what partnership means, stepping up when your partner needs support. The problem reveals itself in the selectivity. Her capacity is not consistent, it's conditional. She can manage physical demanding activities when they serve her interests, but become incapable when those same physical demands would serve yours. The other dimension of this tactic involves medical deflection. If you suggest she sees a doctor about the persistent pain or exhaustion, she'll either refuse, make excuses, or actually go and then return with validation that shifts blame onto you. The doctor might confirm an injury that she attributes to something you asked her to do, or the symptoms are labeled psychosomatic, which she then blames on the stress you cause her. Either way, the medical system becomes another tool to avoid accountability rather than a path to genuine treatment. What you're left with is a dynamic where her physical state dictates everything. Your needs are postponed indefinitely because she's always too unwell to engage. Your rest is sacrificed because someone has to do the work she can't manage. And your observations about the selective nature of her symptoms are dismissed as you being insensitive to her genuine suffering. Type 3 is weaponized emotional fragility. Weaponized emotional fragility is the ongoing position of herself as too emotionally sensitive, too psychologically vulnerable, or too traumatized to ever be held accountable for her actions. This differs from emotional collapse in its permanence. Type 1 is an acute reaction that happens within the moment. This is a chronic state she's established about herself that exists before any conflict even begins. What exposes this as manipulation rather than genuine limitation is its selectivity. Her fragility only applies when it serves to avoid something she does not want to do. She tells you she cannot handle certain conversations because they are too triggering. She claims cleaning brings up trauma from her past, so you need to do it. She says confrontation makes her anxious, so difficult discussions are off the table. This framing is established long before you try to raise a concern. But then you notice when her friends are coming over, she cleans the house with energy and a smile. When she wants to confront you about something, her anxiety about confrontation disappears. When she needs to have a difficult conversation that serves her interests, her emotional fragility that prevented your conversation is suddenly absent. The trauma is selective, the triggers are conditional. This tactic operates as a permanent shield against accountability, but the shield only appears when it is convenient. When you try to speak about her behavior, she reminds you of her sensitivity and how much pressure you're putting on someone who's already struggling. When you attempt to set a boundary, she invokes her trauma and positions your needs as harmful. But when she wants something from you, when she needs to criticize your behavior, when she has demands to make, that fragility evaporates. She can handle pressure when it's you who is under it. She can manage difficult conversations fine when she's the one initiating them. The result is that you become the permanent emotional regulator while she regulates nothing. Your job is to manage her psychological state to ensure she is never overwhelmed, to modulate your own needs so they do not add to her burden. You walk on eggshells, you suppress frustration, you postpone difficult conversations indefinitely because there is never a right time to speak when someone is perpetually on the edge of falling apart. Meanwhile, she has no such restrictions. She does not modulate her demands based on your emotional state. She does not postpone her criticisms because you might be struggling. She doesn't walk on eggshells around you. The accommodation is entirely one way. This tactic positions you as the strong one by default, which means you are expected to absorb everything she cannot. You carry the emotional weight of the relationship. You regulate your own distress because adding to hers would be seen as cruel. And you stop expecting reciprocity because she's already established that her capacity is limited and yours is not. But the evidence keeps accumulating. She has capacity when she wants something. She can manage stress when it matters to her. She can handle what she claimed she couldn't, as long as handling it serves her interests. The damage here accumulates quietly. You are not being yelled at here. You're being told she's too fragile. And because that message is wrapped up in vulnerability rather than aggression, challenging it feels cruel. But the pattern reveals the truth. Her fragility is a tool deployed strategically to avoid what she does not want to engage with while maintaining full capacity for everything else. Now, let's look at some tools that might help you maintain clarity, protect your sense of reality, and hold boundaries when symptoms are being used to shut you down. The first tool is learning to trust the pattern when you can't trust individual incidences. You can't prove a single migraine is fake. You can't measure whether exhaustion is genuine or exaggerated, but you can observe when symptoms appear and what triggers them. You may not be a doctor, and you can't diagnose whether a symptom is real or fabricated, which is what makes this tactic so difficult. You're left trying to spot patterns in something you have no expertise in, but you can observe the timing. Does she become unwell precisely when you need something, when accountability is required, when boundaries are set? Genuine illness doesn't align perfectly with your attempts to speak up. Manipulation does. Selective capacity is another marker. When she's too exhausted to help with tasks, but energized with friends, the wrist that is too painful for shared responsibility manages fine for her activities, or the anxiety that prevents difficult conversations about her behavior never prevents her from confronting you, then there is an inconsistent pattern there. Genuine limitations are consistent. Strategic limitation is conditional. Medical deflection also reveals a pattern. If you suggested seeing a doctor, does she refuse, deflect, or go and return with blame shifted back onto you? Genuine health concerns lead to treatment. Strategic use of symptoms leads to more reasons nothing can change. The next tool is to acknowledge without derailing. When symptoms appear mid conversation, acknowledge them without abandoning your boundary. Say things like, I understand you're not feeling well. We still need to discuss this. You've heard her, you've proceeded anyway. Her symptoms do not erase your right to address what matters. You cannot carry everything indefinitely. If her limitations mean you absorb all responsibility while she contributes nothing, that is unsustainable. Compassion does not mean capitulation. Next is to manage your own guilt. The caretaker guilt you feel when someone claims to be unwell is quite real. You hear this question in your head: if someone you care about is suffering and I do not help, what kind of man am I? That question carries weight. It's designed to. Recognizing this as a guilt trap does not make you heartless, it makes you aware. Compassion is important, capitulation is different. Compassion means caring about someone's well being. Capitulation means accepting dysfunction because challenging it feels too difficult. You can be a good man and still refuse to absorb all responsibility while she contributes none. Being compassionate doesn't require you to ignore the patterns. It doesn't require you to accept that your needs are always secondary, and it does not require you to stay silent when the evidence shows that her symptoms are tools for control rather than expressions of genuine limitation. And then lastly, there's some safety considerations. If you are still in the relationship, your safety depends on how you respond to this tactic. Never accuse her of faking it. Never try to prove that she is lying. These approaches escalate danger and put you at risk, particularly if she responds by making false allegations or using your accusations as evidence that you are cruel or abusive. Instead, focus on your boundaries and your needs rather than diagnosing hers. You do not need to prove her symptoms are fake to know that you cannot continue living in a dynamic where your voice is conditional on her wellness. You do not need to call her a liar to recognize that the pattern shows something unhealthy is happening. The pattern itself is your answer. You don't need a confession. You don't need her to admit manipulation. You need to trust that you have observed and decided whether you can continue in a relationship where your needs are perpetually postponed because she's perpetually unwell. This tactic works because you are a good man. You don't want to dismiss someone's pain. You don't want to be the person who turns their back on genuine suffering. Your compassion is what makes you decent. The problem is when that decency is weaponized against you to keep you silent, overworked, and perpetually second guessing what you observe. You've been carrying weight that was never yours to carry. You've been postponing your needs indefinitely while hers take permanent priority. And you've been told that noticing the pattern makes you the problem. It doesn't. The pattern is the evidence. Trust what you've seen. If you're navigating abuse, separation, or recovery, Stand Again is here. One on one coaching, resources, and frameworks built specifically for men who've been told their abuse does not count. You can find everything at standagain.com.au. And remember, no matter how many times you're being knocked down, you can stand again. This is Stand Again, lived experience platform for male survivors of family violence. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice might just help another man find his. If you're looking for one on one support, you can book coaching with a member of the Stand Again team. Simply visit standagain.com.au, where you will also find grounded information on surviving and recovering from family violence as a man. As always, remember that no matter how many times you've been knocked down, you can stand again.